Hello everybody, my name is Steve Force and I am honored to be the presenter for this ITpreneurs sponsored webinar entitled Enhancing the Value of TOGAF and ITIL. I'm a senior level enterprise architect. I specialize in architecture, in service-oriented architecture, cloud implementation, and services delivery. I am certified on many of the frameworks that we will be discussing here on this presentation within this webinar. TOGAF 9.1, ITIL 3, and PMP certified. I have knowledge and experience and again certification on all these, and I've been a trainer on many of these for many years as well. So again, this webinar is talking about TOGAF and ITIL, how they can fit together. It's a high-level webinar. These two frameworks are very complicated and a lot of information. There's no way we can cover a lot of detail within the next 40 minutes or so, but I will certainly give it my best shot to try to make it as clear and concise as possible to understand at least some of the basics. So here's the agenda of this webinar. Can TOGAF and ITIL coexist? Very good question. Can they? We will introduce architecture, introduce TOGAF and ITIL, see how they fit together, as well as some potential next steps. First, let's ask ourselves the question, can TOGAF and ITIL coexist? Well, not only can they coexist, they must coexist. For an organization to be successful, all strategic initiatives must be well understood by all executives and the key stakeholders and have their complete support. You need to have senior level buy-in to support this. High level support, bottom level support, and all levels in between for this to be successful. Since ITIL focuses more on the service delivery and TOGAF more on the architecture, they are highly complementary initiatives, which we shall see here. It doesn't matter how the organization approaches service delivery or ITIL, or even the architecture, or in which order. The important thing is that the organization just gets started. There are many ways for an organization to gain knowledge of ITIL and TOGAF. However, one of the most effective ways is for all to get formalized training that can be tailored to the specific organizational needs, and then this way the organization starts on equal footing. To start out, here's an example high-level depiction or a high-level view of an architectural process from strategy through detailed design. Now, obviously, the delivery life cycle goes beyond this into the development, into testing, the various phases of testing, into implementation. And for simplicity, we kept those off. But obviously, the ITIL would extend into those as well as does the TOGAF. But here we can start seeing at a very high level where TOGAF, which stands for the Open Group Architectural Framework, and ITIL, which stands for Information Technology Infrastructure Library, can apply to the architectural and delivery within the organization. So TOGAF from the left, so from the enterprise level through strategy into the capability architectures or transition architectures, and then ITIL can take that over from a delivery perspective, solution architect it through design, through implementation. Here's another view of how TOGAF and ITIL can coexist in the architectural delivery process. Notice the overlap. And this is where we as practitioners need to understand where these systems where they do overlap and where they can be effective in the overlap, how we can effectively stitch these type of frameworks together. Notice here though that there's a well-defined building quality validation process step caught out in this process, and that's at the bottom. For any initiative to be successful, we must have quality gates, reviews, and governance built into the process. Otherwise, it will not be successful. It can't be successful. Or even if it was successful, how would you know it was successful? Both TOGAF and ITIL have these gates, these reviews, and the governance built into their frameworks. So we know the strategy and we know the outcomes. Are the outcomes in line with the strategy? We can measure this. We need to measure it. It's very, very important to measure and understand where we are and how successful we have been and where we need to make changes. Here's another high-level view of the ITIL service lifecycle and see how it ties in to the architecturally discovered and defined business requirements and implementation. So this is how ITIL can help fit into the whole architectural business architecture and the delivery lifecycle of any initiative. Ties into the business. It takes information or gets information from the business requirements, feasibility, and then it provides feedback into the process implementation. Are the requirements as defined realized through the delivery process? Checks and balances. Effective. Here we can see in a little bit more detail of how the ITIL main stages, which are depicted on the right-hand side of the slide, can correlate to the TOGAF architectural development method, or the ADM depicted on the left. We'll be looking at this a little bit more detail later on the webinar. But this is one of the clearest points of where these two these two frameworks do intersect and can coexist and need to have effort done for coexistence within the organization. So for any architecture and delivery model to succeed, there are key data elements associated with these processes that must be maintained in a way that can be effectively used by the processes themselves and by any other stakeholder who needs this information. So the repository within ITIL, depicted on the right, is called the Configuration Management Database, or the CMDB. TOGAF has a similar repository for its processes, which we have depicted here on the left. Now notice here that we have them depicted as two discrete repositories, and in most cases, or let's say many cases, what I've seen in most cases, this is how organizations operate. They have two discrete repositories for their delivery side, meaning ITIL, and their architecture side, the repository here. And also in very, very large organizations, let's say global organizations, or companies that have gone through many merger and acquisition type of efforts, they might have very loosely defined IT systems, or federated systems. They might have like local control over various things, and that's very, very possible to support within ITIL and TOGAF, having these so-called federated environments by understanding where these data elements are stored and how they are stored. That's what's key to the success of coexistence, is to understand the data elements, where they are stored, so where the single source of truth is, if you will, the system of record, another way of putting it, are, and the way to help correlate between the various data elements stored in the various repositories and correlate them to the other repositories in the organization, maybe through some sort of an ETL process or some sort of a taxonomy, whatever. So you can logically connect these and use them effectively, such as in reporting, quality, or even in governance. Architecture. So what is architecture? Enterprise architecture means different things to different people. And this is both a challenge and an opportunity for us. So I took the liberty to come up with some well-used definitions of architecture, and I list the authors and the book these are from at the bottom. So within enterprise architecture, the top elements here, Mark Langhurst in his Enterprise Architecture Workbook opined that architecture in a broad sense is the synergy of arts and sciences in designing complex structures such that functionality and complexity are controlled. I like this because I truly feel as a practitioner that architecture is both an art and a science. It takes a lot of discipline, takes a lot of knowledge, takes a lot of experience, domain experience, takes a lot of maturity, in my opinion, to understand organizations and to understand the dynamics of organization, the politics of organizations. And architecture can help organizations understand themselves better. Down through Enterprise Architecture Foundation for Execution, the MIT professors Ross, Weil, and Robertson in their seminal Enterprise Architecture as Strategy book that came out through Harvard Business School back in the, I think earlier in 2000, early 2002 or 2003, something like that. Their definition for that is, in short, a foundation for execution is the IT infrastructure and the digitized business processes, automating a company's core capabilities. So this is the foundation for execution. This is where we start getting away from the theory and get more into the practice, where the rubber really meets the road. And then finally here, in Steven Spiewak's seminal Enterprise Architectural Planning book, which came out in the early 1990s and is still valid today, he defines enterprise architecture planning as the process of defining architectures for the use of information in support of the business and the plan for implementing these architectures. Again, these are some definitions of architecture that I personally like. So here are 3 ways that architecture can help an organization: alignment, insight, and quality. The alignment: architecture can help align the strategy to the operations and business demands to IT supply to help ensure that the changes are in line with strategies and goals. Absolutely. Absolutely. That the changes are in line with the strategies and goals. Insight: architecture can help provide insight into the current and desired state of the organization, information systems, and technology. Current state and desired state, the as-is and to-be state of the organization. Key components of any architecture. As-is state from the business perspective, to-be state from business, through application, through data, and through technologies. As-is and to-be provides insight. Then quality. Architecture improves the quality of individual solutions, simplifies their development and maintenance, and helps extend their useful service to the organization. Absolutely. Not only are the delivered functionality in line with the business requirements and the supporting non-functional requirements for those functional requirements, but they can be effectively leveraged across the organization going forward, extending their useful service to the organization. Very, very critical. Cost effective. So what happens if we don't go through the rigor of architecting, understanding current state, understanding the impact of future state, the risk, and how to understand the risk and to mitigate risk, and to go through the development and the service delivery model effectively? Well, here's kind of a overstated slide showing what might happen is if you make a change, I mean, the building might fall down. Well, in a building architecture, this could very well be the case. Now, within IT architecture, it might not be as radical as this, but for organizations, it could be just as damaging. So enterprise architecture can help manage change in a complex environment. Well, how can we do this? Well, let's think before we act. Let's build a master plan or blueprint of the organizational systems which can help us address the following questions. What systems are we using? What systems do we currently have in place? Do we really know? Have we really validated these? Are these vetted? Who's responsible for these systems? What's the 5-year corporate strategy? What is the organizational need for IT and for services? What is the strategy, and how do we align to the corporate strategy? Why are we using these systems? Why are these systems here? What are the purposes? What's the business value of these systems? What's the cost to both maintain and to run these systems. What systems do we need to support the strategy? Yeah, what do we need going forward? We know the as-is state. We should know the as-is state. What systems do we need to help transition into the to-be state or the future state of the organization? What do we need and why? And then how do we get there? How do we get from current state, the as-is state, to the to-be or the future state? Not only from a high-level view, but through transition architectures into the actual delivery. What's our appetite for change within the organization? How quickly do we need to move? Do we have mandates that we need to change major systems to meet federal, state, local, or international type guidelines? Any mandates? Any other types of things that need to change? How do we know we're changing effectively? How do we know what systems need to be changed? How do we know where the business processes lie? All this kind of stuff. This is where architecture can really very much help. So here are some of the key elements of the organizational architecture, showing some of the interaction across the discrete architectural elements. Every organization has this, and there is an interaction between them. Some examples of how enterprise architecture can help strengthen the organization. From the alignment perspective, architecture helps align the strategy to the operations and business demand to IT services, helps ensure that the changes are in line with strategy and goals. Insight. Architecture can help provide insight into the current and desired state of the organization, information systems, and the technology. And then quality. Architecture can help improve the quality of the individual solutions, simplifying their development and maintenance and prolonging their effective life cycle. So, to recap, enterprise architecture, or EA, can clarify the current and future state of the organization's IT landscape. Clarify it. Put some clarity and some understanding around your current IT landscape and future state. EA can help show the impact of change, both good and bad. Organizations need to know how change impacts their organization. What are the upsides? What are the potential downsides? So EA, or enterprise architecture, works very closely with people identifying risk, managing risk, mitigating risk, and which is really basically all the key stakeholders in any organization. So we as EA practitioners work closely with a PMO for risk mitigation. We help identify the risk, help mitigate, as well as with the delivery. EA can help provide valuable, usable guidance, blueprints, roadmaps to management and to all delivery processes inside and outside an organization. So, for example, PMO, service delivery, key vendors, cloud-based solutions who are providing services, and is a key stakeholder in all aspects of governance. Enterprise architecture is a key stakeholder of governance, providing information for governance, or in some ways being the arbiter for governance. Okay, we've talked about architecture, but how do we put it into practice? Up until now, we've talked theory. Let's talk practice. All right, first of all, maybe let's pick a framework. Lots of frameworks out there. Many of them are proprietary. These aren't all of them. Quite a few, right? Quite a few. So, TOGAF is the enterprise architectural framework that we are going to be discussing here in this presentation. It's one that I have a lot of experience with, and it's one I professionally and personally think is one of the best frameworks out there now. It's not perfect, still needs to improve, but it's in the process of improving, which we'll be talking about here briefly, shortly. It's a standard that's used by the world's leading organizations to improve business efficiency. It's tested and validated. Everyone speaks the same language. There's a vocabulary thing here that gets people across from the business side through deep technology and all levels in between can understand the same thing in their own way in context. So everybody can speak the same language in the language that they need in context the overall architecture. It is one of the most prominent and useful enterprise architecture standards available. You can combine industry best practices and with your organizational needs for best practices. If you have best practices within your organization that you want to continue with or to implement, or if you have some industry best practices that you need to bring in, let's say some mandates or some strong recommendations, you can bring those best practices in, leveraging through TOGAF. You can save time and money. Well, it does cost money to implement TOGAF, not the framework itself, but getting trained, getting the resources, getting the people educated, and just simply getting it into the organization. It does take time and money, but that can more than be recovered through proper implementation, cost savings, risk mitigation, and the agility of the organization. It is a proven, tested, and effective methodology. You can utilize resources more effectively. Oh yeah, yep. And you can utilize them by maybe not having all these various projects in flight that don't need to be, that are doing the same thing. You can demonstrate return on investment. It is reliable and benchmarkable. Some more benefits to TOGAF. It's a consensus framework. Many very large organizations are using it. They're working with it and helping to improve it. The Open Group has hundreds of influential members who are constantly adding feedback to TOGAF. It's a neutral framework. It's an open framework, which means that any member, regardless of size or influence, has equal influence, and no major party can claim higher voting rights. It is a successful framework. It has a large pool of certified EA practitioners, over 10,000, and is growing approximately 80% annually. And it is a certifiable framework. By certifiable, it means that there are many very clear-cut ways to get certified on the framework, and the certification process for the individuals within TOGAF is quite rigorous. I know I've been through it. I've been teaching it for a while, and it's very, very effective to get the practitioners ramped up on TOGAF and implemented correctly. TOGAF itself is not new. It's been around for about 20 years or so. And here we see some of the timeline. We see the timeline starting in 1993 as it's evolved, going through many, many iterations along the way. It's still evolving, and it will continue to evolve. It's good now and getting better. There's some areas within TOGAF I really think need to be beefed up, but I really firmly believe that over time it will get beefed up. So, no, it's not new. It's been around for a long time, and it's been implemented in a lot of places. Here are some of the 6 main components of the TOGAF framework, starting at the upper left, the ADM itself, which we will talk about a little bit more detail coming up, through the architectural content framework, and this framework is the repository that we talked about, where critical information for the various processes within the ADM store their information for subsequent use. The reference models, these are the reference models provided either by TOGAF or within the industry or within the organization. There are ways to effectively integrate reference models together for effective usage. In the bottom there, the enterprise continuum. This is a way to start anywhere and go everywhere. It is a way to start at a very high level and use an expression, drill down or peel the onion into a specific artifact to get more understanding as you go deeper and deeper and deeper, but keeping things in context. You can have various views into an element, into an artifact. You can have different objectives or various understanding of what that means, but it all remains in context through the notion of the continuum. It's very effective. Who uses TOGAF? Well, here's just a handful, a smattering of people, of companies throughout the world who are using TOGAF in one form or another. And more are using it. So it's growing globally. Finally, before we briefly discuss ITIL, here's a reference for the architectural development method, or the ADM. And again, that's the architectural development method. It is the core of TOGAF. It's a proven way of developing an architecture. It's iterative. It feeds from the output from one step, feeds as input to subsequent steps, so that builds upon and drills down, and you get more clarity, more granularity within the continuum as you go from step to step. It's specifically designed to address business requirements. Yeah, the first thing after the vision is, what are the business requirements? What's the business architecture at the very high level? And everything builds off of that. It's a set of architectural views to help ensure that the complex set of requirements are adequately addressed. Yes, the view. Every stakeholder has their own unique view of what an architecture should look like, and TOGAF provides the means to generate these views in a way that contextually keeps things accurate. So let's briefly touch on ITIL. So what this slide's showing here are some of the disciplines or some of the frameworks that exist within the organization. So up at the upper left-hand side, organization might be using COBIT to help provide the governance to the organization. And so COBIT can provide to TOGAF some of the governance structure. TOGAF does not dictate how to do things. It does not prescribe how to do things. You can tailor it to your needs using terminology that you as an organization want to use. So if you want to use some COBIT terminology, you can, and get that information from COBIT. Same with the project management side. So the PRINCE2 or the PMBOK, which is the PMI, PMP stuff. Your project management people can provide project management information into TOGAF and get some information out of TOGAF. Risk, for instance, a key part of it. Many different data elements can be exchanged between these two frameworks. And at the bottom, the ITIL piece. So some of the architectural principles and models can come out of TOGAF, and then some of the resulting strategy and configuration items can be input into the TOGAF iterative ADM process. These systems can and do effectively work together with some work and some effort and some understanding, coordination, cooperation. Here is a sample organizational process diagram going from the top with governance and strategic planning down through architecture, design implementation, and operations and management. Now, we're not going to spend a lot of time looking at this slide because it's pretty busy and a lot of information here, but we just want to show at a very high level how some of these pieces within these frameworks fit in. So ITIL, what exactly is ITIL? Well, it stands for Information Technology Infrastructure Library. And it is a framework for IT service management, both within the organization and outside the organization. It is an effective way to help manage your IT service management internally and service providers externally. It was developed by, and I believe still is owned by, the UK government. and is meant to provide guidance to service providers on the provision of quality IT services. There are 26 processes, and they're organized into 5 core books or stages. I first started seeing ITIL in the early 2000s, like maybe 2001, and got my initial certification in 2002 in Munich, Germany, and saw ITIL being used effectively in Europe, and I'm seeing it more and more being used here within the U.S. How does ITIL relate to TOGAF? ITIL can be seen as an architecture for IT service management. So ITIL can be seen as an architecture for delivery, IT service management. Now both frameworks can provide guidance for design. TOGAF can describe design at the enterprise architecture level, and ITIL can describe the design at the solutions or architectural level. So peeling the onion, drilling down, TOGAF at the upper levels and ITIL at the lower levels with the continuum. An architecture developed with TOGAF requires input from as well as provides input to the ITIL processes. Absolutely. Effective delivery does not work in a vacuum, and there needs to be close-knitted ties between architecture or TOGAF and the service delivery for the organization to be effective. The repositories that support ITIL and TOGAF are related and should build upon each other, should coordinate with each other, as we talked about briefly earlier. So here at a high level are the 5 core ITIL stages and their associated 26 processes. If you're an ITIL practitioner now, this should be very, very clear. A lot of stuff going on within ITIL. Very clear. Roles and responsibilities are well defined, well understood. I think ITIL as a delivery model or delivery method is very, very effective if done correctly. A lot of things going on though within ITIL, just like within TOGAF, and that's another reason why you need experience in your organization. You need trained people within the organization, and the best case is to have the organization trained on these various processes by a reputable training organization. So here are how the 5 ITIL core stages can apply to the process chain. So at the top we see the service strategy. Through the change process we see service design, service transition. In the bottom here in the operation we see service operation and continual service improvement. Now the continuous service improvement, or the CSI piece, really overarches everything because it's a continuous improvement process. One of the advantages, one of the strengths really of ITIL is the notion of continuous service and how all phases can, or all aspects can provide input into the CSI phase and subsequently be actioned upon. So now that we briefly touched on how TOGAF and ITIL, what they are, this process progression from strategy through design and the delivery, and how TOGAF can support this should be a little bit more clear now. Again, there's a lot more overlap than what this slide is showing, but this kind of shows at a very high level how they can fit into the organization. Here's a good a good single slide thing that you can use in an organization to help differentiate what ITIL does, what TOGAF can do. If you're an ITIL shop now, you can say, okay, this is what we're doing here on the ITIL side, and this is where TOGAF or the enterprise architecture people can help us. So finally, as discussed earlier, for any architecture and delivery model to be successful, the key data associated with these processes need to be maintained in a way that can be effectively used by stakeholders in the organization, anybody who needs this information. The repository within ITIL is called the Configuration Management Database, or the CMDB, and that's depicted on the right. And TOGAF again has a simulated repository for its processes, which we have depicted on the left. They are discrete. They can be discrete. They generally are discrete, meaning multiple repositories, and that's not a bad thing. If the organization needs things to be separate for lots of reasons, or if the organization is federated, meaning scattered, then you can have and do have multiple repositories. Just make sure there's a single source of truth for each one, meaning the data elements are stored in only one place only and then leveraged by the other systems. And if you have enough coordination and effort and thought for how these systems, these repositories interact, the organization can effectively link these two or even more disparate repositories together in a way where the data elements can be logically connected and used effectively, such as in reporting, quality, or even in governance, effective use of these repositories. So, to summarize, can TOGAF and ITIL coexist? Well, they must coexist. You can't have two different approaches. They have to coexist. They have to hopefully seamlessly stitch together to be effective. There are various points where they intersect. It's in these intersections where we can focus our coexistence efforts. How does getting TOGAF training help the organization? Well, it's possible to learn TOGAF from reading an independent study, and this is certainly encouraged. However, learning TOGAF with others, facilitated by an experienced certified TOGAF instructor who has years of applied IT architecture and IT service delivery can help have the biggest impact. Training helps organizations ramp up their TOGAF knowledge the fastest, most reliable way possible. Yeah, there is an investment up front, but the back end is the outcome of that is you have a well-educated, motivated team that can be successful. So again, my name is Steve Force, and I'd like to thank you very much for your time and your attention toward this webinar. If you'd like to get more information about training on TOGAF, ITIL, or any of these other frameworks that we mentioned, as well as other sorts of training, please contact ITpreneurs. The information is on the slide, and I'm sure they will help you get the information that you are looking for. Again, thank you very much for your time.